Hey guys, welcome to episode 11 of Understanding with Jonty. Today, I want to talk a little bit about how we ended up here. I keep kind of getting the sense that everybody's wondering, what happened? How did we get here? Where do we go from here? So I thought it's worth having a discussion. It's a very big issue. It feels like it's beyond us, but I do believe there are things we can do. And to understand that, I think we have to study societies where they deal with political polarization, they deal with authoritarianism, they deal with these kinds of difficult times. And I have to say, my family has had to deal with this a lot in our past. So, for instance, my grandfather grew up under Stalin in Russia. My grandmother grew up under Hitler in Germany. My father grew up under dictators in Syria. So my family has had their fair share of extreme governments, extreme right, extreme left, good old fashioned military dictatorships. Um, and I I do have to share they're not good. They're generally not a good place to live, and that's why my family is here. And so thought I'd share a little wisdom I've picked up over the years, some insights that hopefully can help us understand, you know, how we got here. And so that's my focus this time. This time I want to talk about how we got here. Next time I want to get into, where do we go from here? It's not just my family. A a significant percentage of the Muslim world deals with or is ruled by an authoritarian government. And so this has kind of gotten baked into the whole Muslim mentality. It's gotten kind of intermingled with the faith. And, we have these discussions. And I can't tell you how many times over the years and decades I've been going to the masjid that an imam has brought up this verse. And for me, it is both a source of worry and a source of hope. So I want to share that verse with you, and I kind of go into what it means and how we're living that, and where's that hope, right? And so the verse is, God does not change the state or condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. So what does this mean? The easiest way I can kind of explain this is to connect it to Newton's first law of motion. It's the law of inertia. An object that is in motion will continue in motion until acted on by an outside force. That's generally what it says. And this verse is like a sociological equivalent of this law of motion, saying that societies are going to continue on a certain trajectory. They're going to have this inertia. They're going to seem like they've always been this way and they always will be, until the people decide that they want change. Either the change can be either very positive or very negative, right? We often feel disenfranchised. We feel like our power is taken away from us at times like this. For me, this verse is a reminder that no, no, actually we have all the power. We have all the leverage in the situation. And really it's an inward act, changing society. It's not outward. And it's only through conversations like this, it's only through conversations within families, among friends, and spreading ideas that we see, I hope, positive change in society, right? And we avoid the negative change. And that's what I want to talk about. Let's take Europe as an example. So today we look at Europe and we're like, they're democratic, they're Western, they're well off, and this is a product of being a Western democracy. But actually, Europe became wealthy under the monarchs through colonialism. They amassed huge amounts of wealth and power. And so, back in the day, nobody imagined that power could be threatened. Nobody imagined that could be changed. And only, not until the French Revolution did what was there's this kind of like rapid domino effect that kind of spread democracy throughout Europe. But the inertia was the monarchy. Like, it's always been a monarchy, it always will be a monarchy. But like I said, the French Revolution changed the direction of that. That gave people, planted the seed that individuals can change the course of societies. To encapsulate what was going on at that time, how did this inertia get broken, right? Because again, objects in motion tend to stay in motion. Monarchies tend to stay monarchies unless something happens. And so what was it that happened? Historians have been studying this, but I think a very simple way of looking at it is that Marie Antoinette quote, whether real or imagined, it encapsulates the frustration of the people, right? When asked, the people don't have bread to eat, she said, okay, if they don't have bread, let them eat cake, right? That apathy of the wealthy and powerful towards the masses is what led to this frustration, this anger, and inevitably like a hope for a better future, that causes people to rise up and change the course of history in their country and in all of Europe, it turns out, to the point that we look at Europe today and inertia is now on the side of democracy. It feels like democracy was always a part of Europe. Democracy always will be a part of Europe. And that's the power of inertia. It really feels like it's this unchangeable force that it can't change direction, but Europe used to be monarchies. Now they're democracies. And now people are having conversations about, are democracies really serving them? Will Europe really be a democracy in the future? Or was this just a blip? I'm sure the previous empires in Rome and Greece before them, their democracies, they thought they would last forever. But even they were eventually, they had to succumb to the outside force, to the force of the people who felt that their democracy no longer served them. So in the end, it's what's happening in the hearts of the individuals within a society that sway society in one direction or another. Do we keep the status quo, or do we create change and go in a different direction? And it goes in all sorts of directions. You can go from a monarchy to a democracy. You can go from a democracy to a monarchy. You can go from a communist government into a capitalist, and a capitalist to a communist. So these changes, and there are many other options there, but the idea is people have the power to change the trajectory of their society. It's been done countless times in all sorts of different directions. So I have a fair amount of confidence in this statement, in this idea that societies do not change until people change what's in their hearts, until people make a determination to change things. The inertia of society has a life of its own. And it only makes sense, right? When governments build themselves up, they consolidate their power, businesses build around that, people's lives and expectations are built up around that government and how they rule. And so everyone has a vested interest in how things work, and that creates inertia. And the only way that government changes, whether it's like an economic system or political system, is when the people become frustrated, don't feel like it serves them, feel like it's harming them, hurting them, depriving them and their children of opportunities. When that change happens in people's hearts, when people feel frustrated and angry, when they start seeing hope in a different way, that's when that's the source of the outside pressure. That's the outside force that that breaks the inertia, that destroys the inertia and sends a society in a different direction. And this could be very good or very bad. Both happen. And to reiterate, to emphasize that it is what's in people's hearts that change the direction of societies. If we look at the French Revolution, it was very messy. You know, the people rose up against authoritarianism, against the apathy of their rulers, and overthrew them. Um, Slaughtered the rich. Like, it was insane. Finally, Napoleon comes around and offers them some stability. And so, in the end, they replaced one form of authoritarianism with another. But that wasn't the end. These transitional periods are easier to shift. The directions are easier to shift. There's no inertia yet. And so fortunately, the will of the people to protect and preserve their dignity, to give their fellow citizens freedoms and rights and opportunities, it was strong enough that they were able to find democracy in this. They were able to recover from this misstep. So it's, but again, if the people's will wasn't strong enough, they could have kept going in this direction of authoritarianism. They could have just replaced one authoritarian rule with another. And, you know, this is the importance of individuals. This is the importance of societies really making a concerted and thoughtful effort, thinking about what direction they want to go in, right? Having those conversations, really considering the options, before we just kind of follow whoever promises to save us. And each one of us makes a difference. And I can't emphasize that enough. So let's make this a little bit more relevant. Let's talk about the US now. Look back at our history. It's very similar to Europe. The 13 colonies were ruled by the kings of Great Britain, the monarchy. And, you know, similarly, in our minds at that time, this can't change. Like, the one of the most powerful armies and navies on the earth at that time, with incredible access to wealth and manpower, you know, was there any other way than to live under a monarch? You know, we hadn't seen an example of that. You know, I just talked about the French Revolution, but in many ways, the American Revolution is what kind of gave Europeans, the French, the courage to take some of those steps that they took. Because, oh, it is possible to fight off your monarch. It is possible to gain freedom. And then they took it to the next level. We were in a very similar situation as the rest of Europe at the beginning of this country. The inertia was in favor of the monarchs. But something else was happening. Educated people were having conversations about ideas that were being spread throughout the Enlightenment. Ideas of freedom, equality, human dignity, God-given rights. Some hearts were already changing. They already were seeing a different world in their minds and in their hearts. They knew there was a better way. And they felt the sting of oppression, you know, in contrast to this world that they were starting to form in their minds, this world of freedom and human dignity and human rights. And it was hard for them to go back. And they started having more and more conversations with their fellow Americans, spreading this idea, spreading this hope, spreading this idea of, you know, not having to live the way we are, not having to endure living under a monarchy, having to just basically cater to their every whim, or suffer horrific consequences. In the end, those ideas spread. Those ideas gained traction. People started to see a better future for themselves and their families. And then that turned into planning and organizing and fighting. And this country gained its freedom. This country gained its freedom from the authoritarian, you know, rulers in the UK. And, it's hard to imagine today, right, that we were anything but a democracy. But that's the power of inertia. That's the power of, once things get going and a system, a society builds itself around a form of government, a form of economics, certain expectations about what life should be like, it continues. And it can be either a very beautiful thing or a very bad thing. But in this case, there's a reason my family is here. We fled societies that were authoritarian. We fled societies that were fascist and communist and dictators, and just cruel figures that were more interested in their own power, preserving their own power, rather than looking out for the rights and freedoms and dignity of their citizens. But something else is happening now. There are conversations about democracy. Does it serve the people? Is it really making our lives better? Is our government, is this free democratic government really serving our needs? Similar to what happened in Rome, right? Politicians are too busy arguing. Special interests are too busy getting their needs met, and the rest of us are being ignored. People are falling behind. People are falling through the cracks. And, just like in Rome, opportunists come out of the woodwork. They promise to solve our problems. And so, those conversations are going on right now. The inertia seems to be in the favor of democracy, in preserving the status quo. But we're in one of those tenuous times that can change the direction of the society. And as for me, I don't think that's a good thing, right? Look, I'm not saying the status quo is good. It's not. We have left people behind. Special interests have corrupted our system. But I know the other systems we're talking about, whether that be like a dictatorship, or talking about communism, or talking about populism, or Christian nationalism, or any of these ideologies that are claiming to solve all our problems. They're just, an easy vote and everything will be solved. I'm sorry. Like, it's been tried throughout history. In my family, we're a product of that. And that's the reason we're here, is because those systems don't work. They promise to, inevitably they can't. And so the new government sole purpose becomes preserving themselves. And that is the sad reality. Like, maybe something different can happen. It's possible. It's possible. But it is just less likely. The number of times this succeeds, it's low. And even where it succeeds, it's because they moderate it very quickly. And there's no guarantee they will do that. It takes a special type of government to really be looking out for the people to do that. And oftentimes they get very greedy and self-centered and just think about their own survival rather than that of society. So in the beginning, I asked the question, how did we end up here? How did we get here? And I've kind of addressed that, right? Because I don't believe there's anything particularly wrong with our system. I think the American Revolution came about to look out for the interests of average, everyday people, to oppose authoritarianism that would just, impose its whims on the people, trample them, walk all over their dignity. It was an ugly thing. And now we're being promised by people who lean authoritarian that they're going to make things right. I'm sorry. We've been there. We've done that. The assessment of these extreme groups is correct, that the people in charge have allowed special interests to trample all over us, have allowed the most wealthy and powerful to have an undue influence on our government. And we feel that sting. Not everybody. Many of us kind of in the middle. Life is okay. Why mess with something that's working? Well, because it's not working for everybody. Because we can see things getting worse. You know, I have kids. I worry about them. Yeah, my life is okay, but well, what's going to happen to them? Are they going to be able to afford housing? Are they going to be able to afford a life? Like, are they going to be able to get an education? Will that be enough to provide for them? So, even people who have a good life, they will consider more extreme ideas if they're concerned that the status quo will not serve them. And this will break the inertia. And I think the inertia needs to be broken. We need to change course. But often what happens at these times is we change course in very radical directions. Like I said, we go towards communism, we go towards fascism. We go far right, we go far left. It's just a human tendency. We just want something very different, right? It's usually these very extreme voices that guide society in very extreme directions with good intention. It doesn't come from somewhere, evil necessarily. Often they're trying to solve problems and they think that these extreme ideas are legitimate. Unfortunately, they're not. And, any student of history can tell you that. I want to introduce a new idea here. My wife tends to think I make things complicated, and maybe I am. I hope this doesn't get too confusing, but, inertia is definitely a factor in causing the masses, like a large chunk of society of people who are living comfortably, who are like, why are we shaking the boat? Why are we talking about these extreme ideas? Let's just keep things status quo, right? But we are part of that problem because we are allowing people on the fringes of society to fall through the cracks, and we're causing suffering not just for them, but for future generations, because this will not get better, okay? And the idea of inertia is one of those things that stops us from acting, stops us from considering different ways, from getting involved. It paralyzes us because we're like, well, this is the way things are, and what can I do about it, right? It's always been like this, it always will be. There's another factor I realized recently, and this idea of focus. It's weird, right? Focus is a good thing, and it's something we learn, right? We learn to focus on our job, to filter out extraneous details, to not get distracted by things that are not relevant to what we're working on. And it makes us really great employees, makes us really great workers. And oftentimes we come home from work and we apply that lesson to our life in society, our political life, our social life, our everything else. And unfortunately, our democracy is built on us all being involved. There's a civic responsibility, not just jury duty, not just, there's I know all these things are painful, right? Jury duty and voting and being informed. These things are very difficult, but that's the price we pay for freedom. That's the price we pay for living in a free society. It's not free. It's not free. It comes at a price. We have to give up some time and effort to consider the big picture, to consider the other people in this country and how are we being governed and are we going in a bad direction. But like I said, inertia is one of those problems. The other thing is focus. We are so focused on what we do and we're like, well, there are people more qualified, more knowledgeable, let them do it. But our government is very different than a for-profit company. Our government doesn't have, a North Star metric or KPIs or, an incentive structure that makes sure they serve the people even better, serves their customers even better, serves U.S. citizens even better. Because we have felt that the government is working just fine. It's great. Doesn't need me. Because of that, because politicians were all boring, they're in the middle, like, when I was growing up, 80s, 90s, politics was boring as anything. Like every politician sounded exactly just like every other politician. And so there was this complacency that we felt, right? And we dropped the ball. But governments are very different than corporations. Governments are a manifestation, a realization of the will of the people. And very similar to that verse I mentioned that scholars like to remind us of, so to try to encourage us and give us this, empower us, that look, yeah, it seems that society is very difficult to change, but if we can just work on our own hearts, work on ourselves, be better people, then change will come. This country is kind of built on that idea. It's government for the people, by the people, of the people. We play an integral role in that. Losing focus on and thinking that it's somebody else's job has been a real disservice, because when we started ignoring politics, that's when special interests realized there was a void that they could fill. There was this way to start influencing politics, influencing law, influencing who gets elected, influencing appointments to judicial positions. And so our government has definitely shifted in taking care of the most wealthy and powerful in society, because we dropped the ball. That's the first failing we need to acknowledge. One, we dropped the ball. It seemed like everything was going well, but it wasn't. We weren't doing our job. Politicians didn't make us aware of this. The media didn't make us aware of this. But we still have a responsibility to know this, that we are a government for, by, and of the people. And without us, bad things happen. Without us paying attention, without us being involved, without us pushing back, we can allow society, and we have allowed society, to disenfranchise a significant percentage of the population. And the good thing is, again, we have the power to change that. We can be more involved. We can be more aware of what's going on in our government, especially now with social media. There's so many influencers out there that are talking about it. I know sometimes it's hard to cut through the noise, but find professors that are also influencers. Find educated people who are talking about the economics, the politics, the government, all the history that's relevant to today, and make your judgments. Start thinking honestly, use your own intelligence and decide who's right, who's wrong, how are they right, how are they wrong. Have discussions. That's going to change things. We have that power to pick that ball back up. The other problem that we have to acknowledge we cause is apathy. We stopped caring. We stopped caring about each other. For example, when manufacturing was leaving this country and a lot of people lost their jobs, we didn't stand up for them. We didn't say, okay, so how are you going to retrain these people? How are you going to retrain the next generation to make sure that they can get the jobs of the future? If we're not going to be doing manufacturing, what are we going to be doing? And how are we going to be ready for that? Are we changing our public education? Are we offering scholarships to colleges for degrees that we will need in the future that we don't have right now? And we just dropped the ball. And that's the apathy. Like, if we're aware of politics, if we're keeping up on what's happening in society, if we ask very simple questions, we'll realize that, okay, no, our politicians aren't doing a good job. We need to push them on this. Because what happened is, when we weren't looking, is instead of educating our own people, we brought in people from overseas to fill in those high-paying jobs. And my family's benefited from this. I have cousins who are medical doctors who came to this country and benefited from this. I have cousins who are engineers who studied in their home country and were able to come to this country and get well-paying jobs, because we as Americans decided not to invest in ourselves. not to tax those companies, those corporations that were offshoring, and demanding that they pay some of those extra profits to retrain Americans. And that's how we let ourselves down. That's how we, and I'm not anti-immigration. I think it's very important we have a robust immigration program. I think it's critical for the success of this country, but it doesn't mean we have to sacrifice our own people. We can do both. Even when we saw homelessness rates increasing, we didn't do anything. We didn't demand that, you know, the mentally ill who were left homeless because, you know, insane asylums were shut down because they were inhumane. We didn't demand the building of humane facilities for these people. We didn't demand, you know, housing to be provided, or programs to help people with a drug addiction get off the streets. We let each other down. And in 2008, 2009, the housing crisis, you know, banks and financial institutions were irresponsibly giving money to people who couldn't afford it. And they were selling those bad loans as investments to other people. We didn't demand that housing be a human right, or at least a right for Americans. That we didn't demand that banks and private equity firms stop making a profit off of this need that people have for housing, artificially inflating prices, turning the society into the haves and the have-nots, the property owners and the renters, the lords and the serfs. In many ways, we're going backwards, and we're rehashing history. We're creating like the super haves and the super have-nots, and we're wondering, why are we at each other's throats? Why are we talking about revolution? It's all these things. It's dropping the ball, not paying attention to politics, not keeping politicians in check, not caring about each other. So I'm sorry if I'm coming across very negative. The truth is, there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of optimism. There's a lot, and it comes back to that verse I started this episode with. God does not change the state of a people until they change what's in their hearts. And that second part is what I want to emphasize. That second part is how I want to end, until we change what's in our hearts. Right now, we're very divided. We have bought into this division, this hatred for our fellow Americans, and it's just all a lie. I'm sorry. The people who started this country had hope for a better future, inspired their fellow countrymen with thoughts of freedom, of dignity, of opportunity. I don't get that from our leaders today. I don't see them uniting us behind some grand vision. I see them dividing us, manipulating us. The good news is we have the power to change things. It's our hearts. We get to decide what we let into our hearts. We get to decide who we let into our hearts. And I think it starts with us looking at our fellow Americans with love and compassion, with care. You know, our leaders want us to look at each other and hate each other. And that shouldn't have any place in our hearts. That shouldn't have any place in in the life of an American. We are here to lift ourselves up. My family came here from around the world, from authoritarian countries that trampled on the dignity of human beings, that deprived them of any God-given right that this country promises us, that deprive them of opportunity and freedom. And so we came from around the world and were united by this nation. My grandfather from communist Russia under Stalin, my grandmother from Nazi Germany under Hitler, my father from a dictatorship in Syria. So all these people from all these different walks of life, not sharing a faith, language, ethnicity with the vast majority of Americans, came here and found freedom, found opportunity, found dignity. And I think it particularly hurts me to see us going in this direction of being let down by a corrupted system and turning to the very systems that led to oppression in the countries my family came from. We can do better. It's time to take back our power. You know, politicians love it when we feel disenfranchised. They love it when we pin all our hopes and dreams in them getting into office and fixing everything for us. But the reality is no one person is going to fix this for us. The reality is societies change when people's hearts change. And right now, our hearts are full of apathy, fear, they're divided. And what we need is for hope to come back into our hearts, for love, compassion, for each other, to create a vision together of that better future. Like the people who founded this country created a vision of hope and opportunity in the colonists in the early days of this nation. We need to return to that. It's easy for us to just say, okay, you fix this for us. But there's a price you pay. Like I said, the price we pay for being a democracy is being involved, giving our attention, giving our time, sacrificing for the greater good of everybody. And these politicians want to give us that pill, that cure-all. It's always a lie. It's always a lie. It comes at a price, and the price is our freedom, the price is our dignity, the price is division and loss of opportunity. In the long run, we lose more than we gain. And it's time for us all to really, it doesn't take much. Look inside our hearts. How do you feel about your fellow Americans? Can you see the good in each other? If you can, you know what? There's hope for us. And I want you to have those conversations with your friends, with your family. I want you to spread the word like the people who founded this country spread word about the revolution that was going to bring opportunity and hope to this nation. And we don't need revolution. We need to revive the heart and soul and origins of this country. And that's what's going to make us great again. Thanks for your time. Let me know how your conversations go. Wishing you the best. Bye.